Follow the fastest growing sport in the world, mixed martial arts, with MMA Meltdown on the most recognized four letters in sports, ESPN Radio. Make it 1580 ESPN every Saturday from 9 to 11 as the MMA Roundtable breaks down the complete coverage from the world of mixed martial arts while maintaining a passion, experience, and keeping our commitment to a fresh approach that has made us the most recognized MMA show on the airwaves today. MMA Meltdown, Saturdays 9 to 11 on ESPN 1580.
Steve Alley, 1023 ESPN MMA Meltdown. Very pleased to be joined by two-time UFC heavyweight former champion Frank Mir. He fights in the co-main event at 164, the UFC, against Josh Barnett. Frank, thanks for taking time. I know a lot of people ask for your time, and we go way back. You probably don't, you may not remember, way back to UFC 34, November of 2001, and now here you are, some 12 years later nearly, and you fight Josh Barnett on Saturday evening. Your thoughts on the fight? You've probably been asked so many times, how do you feel about it with everything you've done in the UFC and your fight career? How do you sum up this fight, you being former heavyweight champion, he being former heavyweight UFC champion? Pretty good matchup. Your thoughts?
I just think it's going to be an excellent fight. I think that both of us bring a very similar style of, strikes and submissions that try to finish fights. Whereas, sometimes you see some matches go more into controlling, trying to just win on judges' scorecards. I don't think either one of us have ever had that said about our fighting styles.
More fights for you in the Ultimate Fighting Championship than any other heavyweight, and former champion. At this point in your career, with the ups and downs that you've experienced, going way back to when you started, to the motorcycle accident, to the many things that you've done, what do you do from here, and how do you prepare up for a fight like this? I know you've faced a lot of very tough competition, but now at 34, here you are some 12 years later and still doing the same thing. Is there a point that it changes for you? And I hear people say, Frank, hey, this is just another fight and I'm going to treat it as such. How do you look at this type of fight?
I think because I've always approached all fights as a way to measure myself and try to become a better martial artist, to see if my training and to see what I'm doing, and this is like the litmus test. So basically that allows me to look at every fight pretty much the same. Obviously titles and recognition and who you're fighting, that kind of comes in after the fact, whether after you're successful on that night, and what rewards you get. But as far as just once the octagon door closes and, you go inside there and you're performing, it's the same as everything else, because it's like, well, it's one guy versus me trying to beat me at this set of rules that we've, agreed to, and basically, to see where I'm at as a martial artist and what my weaknesses and strengths are, and to try to find his.
Are you still training with Jackson's in Albuquerque?
Yes, I go out there now.
Now, how does that work for you? In the past, you've trained in the Las Vegas area and done what you did. Has it elevated your status as far as the training with all the people that they have there and various training partners? How does that lead into this fight with Josh Barnett?
It's helped out immensely, obviously. I think that one of the biggest facets of it is that, that I get away from the house, that I'm not a father and a husband first. I'm actually putting fighting, Monday through Friday, being a martial artist is my number one goal and first priority. And it's hard to do that when you're, in between training, you're coming home and the kids and the wife, are there, you can't really shut that off unless you put, a couple 100 miles in between you and them. And then, just being in a room full of other guys that are always suffering and training. I have a great coaching staff that I also use in Vegas, and I, in fact, bring them out there with me to Albuquerque a lot. But as far as training partners, obviously Jackson's has some of the greatest, guys in the fighting business right now out there. So it's a lot more enthusiastic to show up to class or practice when you have, 15, 20 other guys that are all top-notch world-class fighters also going through the same thing and also training. There's a camaraderie there, and it brings up the motivation.
What will you cut from to get to your weight for the fight against Josh Barnett?
Actually, I'm not going to cut anything. I'm actually about 20 pounds or 10, 15 pounds under the weight limit.
Really? So right now you'd be about 245, walking at 245?
Yeah, 245 to 250.
Wow, that's a great weight for you, and many accomplishments in the UFC. The only toe hold submission. You've broken a lot of limbs and done great submission work. I've been at UFCs, one in Shreveport, Louisiana, where we stood at the table about 4 hours prior to that event, if you recall, and you did a clinic on submissions and other things to do with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in MMA, and I think you're one of the more knowledgeable practitioners, and you've done a great body of work in that. In MMA, since you've been in it so long, Frank, how do you look at it now as opposed to when you started? What changes? What do you like? What maybe you don't like in what has happened in mixed martial arts over the last decade?
Well, I think the biggest thing that's happened is that everybody knows the techniques now. I think back when I first started, I would watch other guys train, and you'd still have it to where there was people that didn't know how to stop an arm bar, or they had no idea how to get out of a guillotine, or there was very much of a learning curve. Whereas now, and you could surprise people. You didn't have to necessarily be the most conditioned or the better athlete, but the other guy just had no clue what was going on or had a big blaring weaknesses in his game. Whereas nowadays, it's not the case. Regardless if a guy likes to do a certain submission hold or a maneuver, everybody pretty much knows everything. And they train all aspects. Pardon me. Excuse me. They train all aspects of the game. Whether they have a preference or they enjoy that aspect of it, will play into their offense. But defensively, you don't see guys that are completely clueless or, giving up their necks in a bad situation and, completely moving the wrong direction where you're like, wow, that guy just had no clue where he was. It's never the case anymore. And so it now falls upon being a lot more conditioned and a lot better shape, more like a legitimate sport now. I think it would be like playing football and the other team doesn't really know the rules. Well, how good a shape do you really have to be in? The other guys have no clue how to practice or how to, execute a play. Once everybody's on the same level, and now it's going to come down to conditioning and athleticism and who's more determined.
So given those things that you just went over, I'll ask you, how many times in the past might you have fought someone knowing with your superior ground you didn't have to do quite as much, and because you knew maybe deep down in the back of your head that you were going to just work for the submission and get out of there with a victory fairly quickly, because after all, you have more submissions in the heavyweight class than anyone in the UFC. Did that enter your mind much in the past? I'm sure it's changed now, but how about in the past?
Oh, yeah, so there was definitely a comfort zone there that, went to go fight Tank Abbott. Obviously, I wasn't, I knew that there was very little submission defense on his side, whether it was just a lack of wanting to learn it or maybe just a lack of as many instructors back in the day that were legitimate to be able to teach it. I went into several fights earlier in my career knowing that the other guy didn't have the same basis for ground fighting or submissions that I did. And so that does give you a little bit of comfort when you go into where you don't have the same drive to push as hard in the gym. You're like, well, once we get here, the guy's clueless, and I'll have a distinct advantage.
Very good. Our special guest right here on 102.3 ESPN, two-time former UFC heavyweight champion Frank Mir, and the most decorated in the heavyweight division. Frank, I'll ask you this. At 34, you fought many times, and you've accomplished many things. You've done a great job as a fighter, a good job as a color commentator. At 34, though, you got a lot of time left, I think. Your plans for the future, are you going to stay in it? Realistically, you could probably go up to 40, 42. Many have.
Yeah, no, actually, the wife always tells me that. She's all, anytime we're watching fights, and if any of the other fighters are a little bit older than I am, especially specifically Dan Henderson, she's like, how old is he? And I think, he's 42. She's all, why do people keep asking you whether you're retired? I don't know, babe. I just have seen me for a while. I just want to see somebody new.
I don't think it's time. I believe your skill level speaks for itself, and you got a great opportunity here to get back in, and wish you, as always, the best in your future, and especially against Josh Barnett on Saturday. And, man, all I can say as a media guy, thanks for all that you've done in the UFC for mixed martial arts. I hope you remember there's been many times that I've covered UFCs going way back to UFC 33 and then, of course, 34, where you fought Roberto Traven, and I interviewed you, and your father was there. Then I met you in Shreveport, and on, and it goes even further. Even when you had the motorcycle accident, I remember you limping down that corridor, Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, and we talked. I always wish you the best, Frank, and it's a pleasure to get the time with you, and my best to you in the future.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Frank.
Yep.
Good.
Yeah.
This call has been recorded.